Good afternoon. I'm Trevor Mead, a staff associate with the Green Parking Council. I would like to welcome you all to our webinar on EV charging technology, the ADA, and universal design. This presentation will be the first of many informational webinars to be hosted by the GPC. We are using these webinars to educate the parking community on various issues related to the implementation of sustainable technologies and programs in parking facilities across North America. If you encounter any technical problems during the presentation, please email Paul Wessel at paul@greenparkingcouncil.org.
Because the old stripe is only up to here. Okay.
This webinar will help to answer the question of how to make electric vehicle charging stations accessible to the greatest number of people. Our first panelist, David Mayfield of Sustainable Transportation Strategies, has combed through the newly implemented federal ADA standards for accessible design to discover which standards within the document can be applied to electric vehicle charging. He has combined these findings with his field experience to develop a series of guidelines for accessible electric vehicle charging installations, which he will share with you. Our second presenter, Dr. Sharon Joines, is an expert in universal design, a school of thought that believes all products and environments should be designed to be usable by all people without the need for adaptation. Dr. Joines will explain both the concept of universal design and the value it brings to those products and environments that successfully incorporate its principles. Each presenter will speak for 10 minutes. Please enter any questions you may have into the chat box located on the left-hand side of your screen. We will take time after each presentation to answer the questions that have been submitted. The webinar will run no longer than an hour. I would like to take a moment to thank our partner organizations. It is the contributions of these 24 businesses that make all of our programs and initiatives possible. In particular, I would like to recognize EVSE LLC and Garage Juice Bar, our two partners from the charging community. Without further ado, I would like to introduce David Mayfield of Sustainable Transportation Strategies. David has built a career in transportation and land use planning by helping stakeholders solve mobility needs and minimize environmental impacts. Over the past 3 years, David has worked with the governor of Oregon on electric vehicle infrastructure issues, managed electric vehicle infrastructure planning in Oregon for the $230 million Ecotality EV project, and drafted EV charging for persons with disabilities, a document made possible by Clean Fuels Ohio, Virginia Clean Cities, and the Ohio Air Quality Development Authority. I will now turn the presentation over to David.
Thank you very much, Trevor, and also thanks to Green Parking Council, everybody there, for inviting me to speak on this subject, which has been of great interest to me since I was first tasked with trying to solve this issue of providing design for spaces for persons with disabilities at EV charging stations, and knowing full well that there's no federal guidance available. When I was working with the state of Oregon, we asked the Department of Justice for some guidance, and what we were told was that we must comply with ADA, and that was about all we could get out of the federal government at that point in time. Recognizing that federal and state regulations do apply and we had to be creative, we did come up with some ideas. And most of you probably are already aware that ADA guidelines do apply to places that accommodate the public, and also to commercial facilities such as offices that do not directly serve the public. So when I decided to prepare a report on EV charging for persons with disabilities, I didn't want to do it just from a regulatory point of view, but I wanted to try to put myself into the position of a person with disabilities who needed to use the equipment. And so I reached out to a number of professionals in the business, as well as some disabled people that I knew, to help me through this. So I'm going to give you the highlights of what I discovered. As you can see on this slide, good intentions in the early rollout of electric vehicles is it's nice, but not enough. Believe it or not, this orange extension cord is an official EV charging station identified on the National Database of the Alternative Fuels and Advanced Vehicles Data Center, the federal map that identifies EV charging stations. So it's a good time to go beyond good intentions and do our best to design charging stations that serve the entire population, including persons with disabilities. By the way, this electric cord does reach a regular 120 volt outlet, and that would provide what is called a level 1 charge or a level 1 charging station. What most people are doing right now in terms of installations in parking areas are what's called level 2 charging, and that is rated at a 208 to 240 volt circuit. So it's much more powerful, provides a much quicker charge than the level 1. Unlike the level 1, the level 2 has an attached cable. That cable is around 18 feet in length and provides a lot of interesting opportunities to figure out what to do with it when it's there, attached to the vehicle, wrapped around or not wrapped around where it's supposed to be. In any case, we have now we're introducing new equipment and new activities into a garage or a parking lot. There's the charger. There's the cable that needs to attach to the car. And indeed, there is no standard place on the car where this cable attaches. So it could be at the front of the car, like a Nissan Leaf, or at one of the rear bumpers. And more importantly, and specifically relative to persons with disabilities, there needs to be space to operate around the vehicle in order to charge the car. Well, we have, effective as of March 2012, new federal guidelines for the ADA standards for accessible design. And these guidelines, while they do not address charging stations, do provide some very good foundation ideas for how we can go about providing charging for persons with disabilities. But just in terms of broad overview, the ADA guidelines do require a parking ratio of 1 to 25, one ADA accessible space per 25 parking. And the first one should be van accessible. After that, 1 per 6 of the ADA spaces should be van accessible. Now, at the state level, we are seeing some regulations about EV charging stations and ADA requirements. In the state of Washington, there's I believe a 1 to 50 ratio of ADA spaces that need to have some connection to or ability to connect to a charging station. Finally, I do want to mention that a lot of people do use the ANSI 2009 guidelines for new facilities, constructing new facilities, and that is also a great reference. Moving on to the 2010 standards, I just wanted to point out a few of the diagrams that I think particularly pertain to moving, getting a car charged at a charging station. On the left, you'll see that there is a 5-foot access path, which is great for being able to set up your wheelchair, get in your wheelchair, and in fact even be able to turn the wheelchair around. On the upper right, you'll see that requirements for an access aisle are 36 inches. If you think about that on the side of a vehicle, that's quite a bit of space. You'll also see in that diagram that it does pinch down to 32 inches for short periods. And also important is the reach range, high and low reach range of an individual in a wheelchair approaching a charging station. And one thing that we see a lot of is that the obstacles in front of the charging station reduce that reach range from what would typically be a 48-inch maximum to lower than that. The guidelines point out that if you're between 10 inches and 24 inches away from the charging or from a vertical pedestal that you're trying to reach, the high range would drop from 48 inches to 46 inches. Finally, also in the guidelines, the parking space really ought to be on firm ground and nearly level. That's pretty important if you're trying to set up a wheelchair. So one of the things that I see quite a bit of a discussion over is gee, we're not necessarily signing these charging stations for ADA only, so does it really matter that they be close to the destination? I would recommend that at least the first space that is ADA accessible be located near the destination, because the very same reason that the requirements say that ADA spaces should be located near the destination. It may require more time for a disabled person to get to their destination. They have a limited amount of energy, some of them. If you're outside, there may be some weather that a person moving slowly should not be exposed to. So I do recommend proximity to the destination, and also to take care that the installation of charging stations does not block existing access. This is one of my favorite slides because it shows a way that the charging station can be blocked, well, 3 different ways. By the wheel stops in front, where a wheelchair cannot get between the wheel stops. By the curb itself, which is set more than 24 inches from the charging station. And also by the bollard placement, which would not eliminate but restrict the ability to turn around in that space. So that's a slide that shows well-protected charging stations. Also important is tripping hazard issues. On the left, you'll see a standard charging station which has a cord that is not lying flat on the ground, and even for anybody, there is a tripping hazard associated with that cord in that condition, especially if there are 2 cars parked adjacent to one another so that the cord is not that visible. On the right, you will see the charging station produced by EVSE, which is on a track and vertically drops the cable to the charging port, and this eliminates the tripping hazard and is specifically designed with ADA use in mind. Another issue is whether or not a wheelchair can be turned around at the station. Somebody may wheel up to the station, grab the cable, and then need to get back to the charging port in the car. In this particular example, the charging station is on the left of the blink charger, and an ADA space is on the right of the blink charger. A person could not get between these vehicles with a wheelchair to approach the station, but even if one of the vehicles was not there and they approached the station, there is 37 inches or something there to get a wheelchair into the station, but there's just not adequate space for turning around and returning to the vehicle. So that is another thing that really needs to be considered. Slope is also an issue. Where you park, again, I mentioned that it's important to have the 2% slope pretty much level at the parking stall, and the route itself to the charging station should be no more than 5% on the running slope, except where there are ramps. I might add that the host of this decided to place the charging stations outside in the weather on a slope instead of in the parking garage, which was an ideal spot for the charging stations. And finally, please consider that things are changing quite quickly. EVs, basically any vehicle with a gas engine is coming out with an equivalent electric version, so not just the public will be accessing the parking areas, but also delivery and service vehicles and fleet uses as well. I might mention I have a friend who was disabled with polio who now owns an electric-assisted bicycle, which he uses quite a bit. And he will need an occasional charge at public locations, and he will also need secure places to park the bicycle. So lighting and security are also something to consider. And also in downtown Portland, we have observed personal mobility devices for persons with disabilities plugging into level 1 charging stations. People that I believe are using the light rail to get downtown, and then actually using charging stations for their electric wheelchairs. So thank you very much. I wanted to provide my website link at the bottom of this presentation, where you can download the report on EV charging for persons with disabilities, as I've really only kind of scratched the surface of that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. We will now go over a few questions that have been submitted to us. Paul?
Hi, this is Paul Wessel, Executive Director of the Green Parking Council. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, David. So a couple questions came in. One was wondering, when you were talking about, David, the requirements for EV spaces or ADA spaces, you had used a 1:50 ratio. And the question is that concerned for every regular space or every ADA space?
Well, what I was referring, that was a reference, let's see, to the state of Washington's guidelines for EVs, and I think it was for what they want to see is that the first space, first EV charging station space, be accessible for ADA, and then it's 50 ADA spaces, I think, after that. Frankly, I don't recall right now. That would be something I'd have to go back and check on. But the most important thing is that the first one be ADA accessible.
Okay, another question that came in is, are you aware of any brands of vehicles that are being converted, brands of electric vehicles that are being converted to wheelchair use, or if they're commonly used brands that people who use wheelchairs are using?
No, not at this time. This came up when we were first doing installations. There was a comment that, well, we don't need to worry about van accessibility because nobody is producing the van yet that is converted. Now, within a few months of that thought, the Ford Transit Connect came out, which is a potential vehicle for conversion. And I imagine that there will also be some custom conversions that will be occurring as well.
Okay, and the next question somebody asked is, what do you think are the next steps for developing a set of common accessibility standards specific to electric vehicle charging?
Well, that's a good question, and I think that what's important to remember is that even if the federal government does issue some guidelines that are common, the states are going to have their own version of the guidelines, where there's going to be some states that are more stringent than others. I will be producing some templates, design templates that will be available on my website later this summer. I have a client who's asked me to produce some best practices designs. So I don't know if those will be available midsummer or late summer, but they will be useful. Again, they're not official. Given that the whole technology is changing so rapidly, it's really kind of hard to know if the federal government will feel like it's that important to step in and at one point in time and issue regulations, and then find out that 6 months later the industry's taken a left turn. I did not mention in this presentation fast chargers. At this point in time, we're starting to install fast chargers here on the West Coast. They are on the face of it not accessible. The weight of the handle is 19 pounds, and accessibility should be in the 5-pound range or less. So that's just a little add-on.
Okay, great. Those are the questions that have come in so far. Please chat us additional questions about either David's presentation or Sharon's, and I'll send it back to you, Trevor.
Great. Thank you, Paul and David. I'll now introduce our second presenter, Dr. Sharon Joines of NC State University. Sharon is a researcher and ergonomist teaching courses in human-centered design and ergonomics. Her interests reside in universal design, applied product and process research, and the effect of aging on fatigue development and work. Her work has addressed consumer markets, warehousing and distribution, medical applications, and manufacturing environments ranging from forging to clean rooms. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Trevor. I appreciate being here today. I think that this is a great opportunity to bring universal design into the picture, and it's nice to have the opportunity to just start the discussion with what is universal design. Then we can try and talk about some of the concepts and talk about the context in which we're trying to apply it, and talk a little bit about the value too, as a value proposition to folks who are considering this while they're putting forward solutions. I'd like you guys to just take a moment and reflect and clear your mind and imagine that you are woken up one morning to realize that you have a new alarm clock. You recently purchased it, and it's very high-tech. There are lots of new buttons, and really your goal is to turn that alarm clock off. But you are having a hard time understanding the functions and how to interact with it. You finally get it turned off, and when you're getting ready in the morning, you realize as you're going down the stairs after having brushed your teeth that you're feeling a little disoriented after that experience with the alarm clock, and now you start to slip and you reach for the handrail, and you expect the handrails to be there because they're normally there, and there are no handrails, so you go tumbling down the stairs. Then if you can imagine going downstairs and you finally gather yourself and you feel like, well, let me go ahead and make myself a little, I don't know, biscuit and jelly sandwich, and you're trying to open the jar of jelly, and your hands are slipping, and you just feel like, good grief, I'm having such difficulty this morning, and you're fighting with the jelly jar. Really? Does it have to be this way? What if this continued for you all day, every day? And it would just be a very difficult way to exist. And many people are faced with these kind of difficult challenges every single day. And each one of these challenges that I'm talking about is not a challenge of the person. It's a challenge that is man-made and has been created by the artifacts that we have put in our environment, by the way we have selected them, and the way people have chosen to produce them. So really, what's the solution? One potential solution is looking at universal design. And universal design is the idea that design of products and environments that are going to be usable by all people to the extent possible without the specialized need for adaptation or any particular specialized design. So it's trying to include as many people as possible into these solutions. There are different types of solutions. There's adaptable design, accessible design that we've been talking about also, and also universal design. And I think a lot of times people get these confused in their mind and they start to blend together. Adaptable refers to the idea that you have something in place and you need to retrofit because things have changed, and so you have to add something on. Accessible is in the design phase, making sure that people can get to the same location or have access or use the same item, but they may do it in a different way. So not everybody is going to be able to go up the stairs, so there may be a separate ramp as shown in the picture in the middle. Whereas universal design is really predicated on the idea that everybody will use a particular environment or object in the same way, and there's no differentiation between the way people go through it or the way they experience it. So the question is really, how does this work? How can we do this? This sounds like a difficult thing on some levels, and in other levels, a little bit overly straightforward, and why not do things that way? Well, the idea is simple, and the implementation sometimes can be a little bit challenging. So back a couple of decades ago, some folks got together and they had a design charrette where they developed these principles of universal design, and they centered around 7 different principles. So I'll talk briefly about the 7 different principles, and I would also like to identify that within each principle, or for each principle, there are actually some guidelines and a little bit additional detail associated with each one, but I don't want to get into that right now because I think that would just be getting a little bit deep. So when we look at the first principle about equitable use, the idea is that the design is useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities. So the idea of you're heading into the grocery store, and regardless of whether you're walking in or you're using a stroller to push in your children or you're rolling in, you're going to go through the same doors and have the exact same experience regardless of your ability level. The second principle of flexibility in use looks at the idea that what is it inherent in the design that will make it accommodate a wide range of individuals' preferences and abilities. So here, these are illustrative of scissors and new scissors versus the traditional scissors, where you have to exert force when you are cutting, so when you're squeezing together, and then also when you're pulling apart. These scissors are, you only have to apply force in the cutting direction. The handhold on the bottom is open so that people with different size hands can put their hands in there. Also, the top is more open, so you actually don't have to have the coordination to put your finger through a ring. So you're looking at a change here in flexibility and use of a range of strength capabilities and also a range of people's ranges of motion. The next principle is about things being simple and intuitive. So can the design be easy to understand regardless of a person's experience about their knowledge, their language skills, or current concentration level? So back to that idea of you woke up early in the morning and you weren't really concentrating, you were startled, you had a new alarm clock. Could you figure out how to use it very quickly? Obviously that one you couldn't because it was complicated and you had to have experience. The image here is about a person who is in distress, and this very simple emergency phone where the person just needs to walk up to it, push a button, and then talk to it, and the speakers are right there. So it doesn't matter whether you speak the language that the person in that environment is speaking, you know how to use the product intuitively. Fourth principle is about perceptible information. And the idea here is that you want your design to communicate any necessary information effectively to the user, regardless of the ambient conditions or the person's sensory capabilities. So you don't want to have to worry about, well, you should only be using this in a particular lighting level, or the lighting level is too low, or there's a glare, or perhaps somebody doesn't have as much tactile sensitivity. Maybe they're getting a little bit older, and so their tactile sensitivity is less. You want to make sure that the information that's being conveyed is either being presented in a redundant fashion, redundant cueing, or strong enough in any one particular area that the person will be able to get the information across. The fifth principle is about tolerance for error. The idea that occasionally we make a mistake. and we want to make sure that whatever action that we have does not have unreasonable consequences. So we want to minimize hazards or adverse consequences of accidental activation or unintended action. So here we have a nail gun. We know that they were redesigned so that somebody actually had to have the nail gun in contact before they would squeeze the trigger so that we don't accidentally activate it and shoot somebody in the head with the nail gun. Tolerance for error is also my favorite, is Control-Z, so undo. Whenever I'm typing, I use that as much as anything else. Or if you're sending an email, are you sure that you want to send it? You said you were going to send an attachment and it's not there. Those are all things illustrative of things that are tolerant for error. Low physical exertion, you don't want things that are difficult to hold on to or to have to push or exert. Certainly you don't want something that's too heavy to have to be lifted. And then also the idea of size for space and space for approach and use. So you want people to be able to get in there and get around and be able to use the environment without undue stress. So those are the 7 principles about in universal design, and I thought it would be nice to just sort of pull together a couple of examples of things that are done well. Here you can see a machine where it's designed for somebody who is standing up, able to look down, and for somebody who's a chair user, able to reach up. So they're able to use the same piece of equipment there. This is a row of chairs, and if you look at this, it looks like normal stadium seating. A lot of time, if you have an accessible area, it's off to the side, or somebody has to pull up an extra chair, whereas this is a case where we're treating people the same. We're actually going to have them nested right in between. Things fold out of the way, so they are a part of things. This is an example of sensory feedback. A lot of microwaves and a lot of touch screens don't have the edge effect so that we can naturally orient ourselves as in with older phones or push-button devices, but the image on the right shows the way folks have started to come back and provide some of that tactile feedback. These images look at not necessarily the product, but the environment, and so you can take a particular product and construct an environment that makes it very difficult for somebody with a physical disability to use. Such as the woman on the left. She, in order to see what's going on, in order to see if there's a flame, she actually ends up with her head very close to the stove there, and she actually ends up very close to the other eye, which could be heated, which is a real challenge. The image on the right shows the idea that you could actually roll up forward, and if you had the right clearance underneath, you could approach things straight on, and it would be much safer. One of the questions that I get from people is, really, why should I care? What does it matter? And it can come back to money. Obviously, it's a good thing to do, but as we look at the change in our societies, we see that as we shift from 2010 of population to 2050 in the United States, China, and Japan, so some of the really large markets here, we're starting to see a shift in our market to an older market. So you've heard about the aging population. So folks are getting older, and as people get older, their abilities change. And if we look at the change in abilities, look at functional limitations, we can see that a large percentage of the population don't have limitations, but 32% have, or 32 million have some limitations, in addition to that 14 million that have ADA clarifications of limitations, or activities of daily living limitations. Also, if we look at the limitations within the work environment, we have a larger and larger percentage of the people who now have disabilities or limitations within the work environment, but they're still in the workforce. So we really need to think about the idea of making more products and environments readily accessible and readily usable for people with a wide range of abilities, because it really strengthens our economy. And frankly, if you're going to produce something, why don't you produce it right the first time? Why create something where you need an additional add-on in order to solve the problems that people may have? So extra converters, it's an additional cost. There's also value in not having to retrofit so that people can use a particular area. If you are starting something new, why not go ahead and meet those needs ahead of time? So here they were adding on grab bars after the fact. Could we not design it so that people can roll up, have space, and interact with people at the front end? So what can you do? We're talking about EV charging stations, and here it's a very interesting and nice blend of creating not only a product but an environment. And we want to make sure that we're getting it right at the beginning. So what can you do if you're a policy maker or a manager or a planner? Really try and drill down and consider variety in your stakeholders and your constituents. Take some time to educate yourself about limitations and challenges, and consider the principles of universal design when you're planning or specifying or forecasting your needs, and educate your colleagues. The universal design has been around for quite a while. ADA guidelines have been around. They're being revised, but we still need to educate each other and partner with folks who know what's going on and who have been through some of these challenges. For engineers, designers, and developers, consider variety in your target users and your stakeholders. So it's just a little different way of looking at it, but it's the different side of the same coin. Again, learn about existing challenges and consider the principles when you're not only you're designing, but also when you're prototyping and testing. So consider who it is that you're bringing in to help test your prototypes. And when you're generating solutions, make sure that those solutions are usable by a broad range of people. And then educate your customers so that they will find the unique features that you're providing them as valuable, so that they will see and return to you and return to your brand more frequently. Then also when you partner with people who will be able to validate what you're doing and making sure that you get it right. Provided just a couple of resources here, the Center for Universal Design, and you can just search on that. It was an active link, but it's not up there. We also have a design research and methods journal, which is an open source journal where we have documented and inventoried a lot of the materials from the Center for Universal Design in our first issue there. So all of the posters and articles and case studies that you used to have to purchase from the Center for Universal Design are now available free through the Design Research and Methods Journal. And also I point you back to the Green Parking Council, because I would like to underscore their efforts and give them kudos and thank them for inviting not only myself but David to talk to you guys about this. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Now we'll hand it over to Paul, who will field the remainder of the questions. Paul?
Hi. Thank you, Sharon, again. A question came across that reminded me when I was running traffic and parking in a municipality and I needed to get new single-space meters to put on the street. I thought about my 80-year-old parents who would drive downtown and want to park and pay for their parking and go off to do their shopping. And I had to think about what were meters that they would be able to understand and grapple with. So I think having the 7 principles is really helpful for folks. But one of the questions that came in was some parking operators are looking at different EV charging stations and looking at cost, looking at how convenient they think they are. But is there a good test or are there specific questions they should ask or specific things they should look for with EV charging stations to make sure that they're going to be the most accessible to the greatest number of people?
I think one of the first questions is asking the manufacturer, the distributor, who it is that they use as a target market. So who did they test this with? What were the personas that they developed, so that they can actually provide for you maybe some of that information that maybe some of the less savvy purchasers wouldn't know to ask for. So they may have already gone through that.
Okay, great. By the way, one of the questions that came in was asking about copies of the webinar and the presentations, and they will be available on our website starting tomorrow morning. Trevor will give you information about that. on the end. A question came in for David asking about were there any OSHA guidelines regarding cables on the ground for workplace charging? I guess that's an issue that's come up somewhere.
Yeah, and I have not researched OSHA, so I'm not the best person to answer that. I do know that a cable across as a barrier for a wheelchair is not acceptable. I think you get you're trying to be under a quarter inch of a bump in terms of crossing over something with a wheelchair. And so if you, for example, we're using a cable lying on the ground in that space between where it's an accessible path, that would be unacceptable to have that on the ground where it's going to interfere with a wheelchair.
Okay, great. I guess this is a question either or both of you could answer. Someone is confused about there seems to be different state regulations and federal regulations pertaining to accessibility, and they never are quite sure how to handle those differences. Have you come across this, either of you?
Well, let me say this. Like any regulation, any state, anywhere in the United States, you have to comply with the federal regulations. You don't get a choice. If the state regulations are looser, you still have to comply with the federal regulations. You really need to contact somebody at the state level, though, to try to understand if there are any variations with the state ADA requirements that are more restrictive than the federal. And with, just as a heads up, with the guidelines that I prepared, that I did not deal with that at the state level.
Okay, your guidelines covered the federal requirements.
Yes.
Okay, great. Sharon, somebody was asking if there have been any case studies done about products designed with the principles of universal design in mind. Have they fared better in the marketplace or found better consumer acceptance?
Yes, we've actually done quite a few case studies, and several of them are documented in the journal. But one of the things that we've found when we've surveyed folks to talk about things that are universally designed, and we ask people to cite examples of things that are universally designed on their own, oftentimes they will overlook some of the best examples because they just see it, accept it as face value. So those doors that open as you go into, let's say, the supermarket, oftentimes people wouldn't even register that as an example of universal design because it was so well done. Rather, if you put together a set of offerings and ask them about their perception of different examples of universal design, then they're rated very highly. But some of the most successful examples are often not pulled forward by people. So it's a little bit of a conundrum. If you're doing your job very, very well in universal design, people don't even realize you're there.
So good design is good design is good design, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. All right, those are all the questions that have come in. Anybody want to shoot over some other questions? Or David or Sharon, do you have any responses to anything that either of you have said that you want to share with the group?
I think one thing I'd just like to talk about a little bit about equipment selection and what might be useful relative to making sure that it's the most accessible. And it really depends somewhat on the space or the location where you are installing the equipment. First of all, some of the equipment is more difficult to read, as in the screen. It's difficult to read the screens in bright sunlight, and so there are some screens which are very readable in all conditions, and then there are some screens that use different technologies which are not. The mechanism for the cable is really I think the biggest issue. Now, you're going to see, like with EVSE, where there's cable management specifically oriented towards vertical drop. So it's really oriented towards somebody with disabilities. But otherwise, you have a cable that's hand wound around something at the charging station. Typically, they don't automatically zip back into the charging station. And you also have a connector which is in some sort of housing in the charging station, which may, in some cases, some designs, I don't think they meet the 5-pound test of how hard it is to pull them out of their handle. So I think those are two things to consider.
Can I jump in here for a second, David?
Sure.
I would also suggest that even once you have ordered the particular product, the station that you want to have installed, and you feel like it has a good interface so that people can understand what's supposed to be going on, they're not frustrated by it, they can be able to hold the particular charging handle and get it away. My one additional comment is that it doesn't stop there. You need to go back and do essentially a post-installation evaluation and make sure that what you ordered and the way you specified for it to be installed is actually what happened. Because I've found a lot of times some of the best equipment installed in a fashion that was just slightly different, and those folks who are boots on the ground and installing will overlook some things or change some things in the moment, and it will really thwart your best intentions. So I think that evaluation after the fact and sort of a follow-up and do a debrief of the group of people who work together to put it in place is very important.
I think that's an excellent point, and I might add that a number of the installations that I've evaluated have had just one or two problems which are fixable, which would make them a lot more accessible.
Exactly. And yet, if you hadn't followed up and you hadn't done that assessment, it makes it virtually unusable, and then all that money and the effort that somebody went to try and make the correct purchase, that it falls short.
Okay, while you guys were talking, we had a couple more questions come in. They're fast and furious. First of all, we will, at the end of this presentation, in a follow-up email, you will find out where the information, the web links for where the information will be available, and the questions and answers will be embedded in the presentation. You'll be able to watch the presentation. I don't think we'll be typing those out, so that's a good thought. There are a couple of ADA-related questions. Does the first ADA space have to be an electric vehicle charging space, and does the electric vehicle charging ADA space count towards the overall required ADA space requirement?
Well, that's a good question, and I forgot to mention kind of how this is rolling out with I should have clarified that right at the beginning of the talk. What is typically happening is that people are putting in accessible charging stations that are not signed exclusively for persons with disabilities. So they're not counting as part of the ADA parking for the facility. They are only signed as parking for EV charging only, and they just happen to also fit the bill for being accessible. So that is where I would have to say 80–90% of the people who are doing installations are going. I have also seen some that are signed and clearly ADA spots, which are exclusively for ADA parking and have a charging station, but they're very much in the minority. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, we had another question come in about that. So there's a requirement for ADA accessible spaces if you have a well-designed EV charging space that happens to be, because it's well-designed, ADA compliant. you can't count that towards your requirement, but it is permissible to do that. Is that correct?
It is, yeah, right. It is not part of, unless you are signing it exclusively for ADA parking, it's not counting as your 1 to 25 ratio. However, the first EV charging station that you put in really ought to be ADA accessible and meet accessibility requirements, including access to destination and everything else, everything that an exclusive ADA spot would have. I might add that some of the charging station companies are making pedestal units that are specifically ADA sized for ADA use, compared to ones that they make two models, ones that are specifically for ADA use and others that are better for a standing person.
Okay, and another person raised the question, is anybody actually doing research on what's happening out there and EV drivers who may need ADA accessible chargers, or is there a plan to do that research somewhere, because that information would be valuable?
I'm not familiar with anybody doing that research, but I agree it needs to be done.
Yeah, I have not. I mean, I do know, because I have been kind of on the back side of the wall, inside the room where people were involved with the designers doing their best to make equipment accessible. But in fact, I think that more work needs to be done relative to the site, the installation site itself.
Okay. And the last question that's come in asked about questions of reach. The 15 inches that you talked about and the 10 to 24 inch measurements, how do those play out here? I guess that's for you, David.
Okay. Well, a lot of times the equipment is set back more than 10 inches, say, from a curb. And if it is set back more than 10 inches from the curb, the federal regulations would say that your upper reach range is not 48 inches, it's 46 inches. So that would be for either using your payment card or grabbing the handle for the charger would need to be, the handle would need to be below that 46 inch. For that, and that would be the federal to really meet the federal guideline. As soon as you as soon as that handle is further away than 2 feet, it just simply doesn't meet the requirements at all. You can't get. There's a lot of people who are just restricted from being able to reach it. I hope if I did not answer that question, then I'll take another shot at it with a follow-up question.
Okay.
All right, thank you. I think in the interest of time, we're going to move on, and any further questions people have, they can submit via email or reach out to David or Sharon via telephone. I'd like to thank our presenters for taking the time out of their day to educate us on this topic. The knowledge they've shared will help us as a parking community to make electric vehicle charging more easily accessible to all individuals. In addition, I'd especially like to thank the support of our electric vehicle charging partners for making this presentation possible. As of tomorrow morning, this presentation, as well as our panelists' contact information, will be available on the Green Parking Council website. I encourage you to reach out to either Sharon or David with any questions that were not answered today. Our next webinar will be held on Thursday, May 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It will focus on the DOE's Exterior Lighting Challenge. We hope to see you all then. Please email me with any suggestions you may have for future webinars at trevor@greenparkingcouncil.org. Thanks for joining us.